The Curse of Crescent Lake, China. Nestled in the heart of the Gobi Desert, Crescent Lake stood as a solitary oasis in an otherwise barren expanse of endless sand. Its crescent shape, like a crescent moon carved into the earth, gave it an otherworldly beauty. Surrounded by towering dunes and distant mountains, Crescent Lake had been a sanctuary for travelers and villagers alike, a source of life in the most unforgiving of environments. The water that flowed through it was pure, nourishing the earth and the people who lived by its banks. The villagers had long believed that Crescent Lake was sacred, that it was a gift from the gods themselves. The lake was known as the Sacred Lake of Eternal Love, where couples who visited it would be blessed with an unbreakable bond, their love eternal as the water that nourished the land. The legend of Crescent Lake was one of peace, purity, and devotion, a place where love would be tested and proven. But the history of Crescent Lake was more than just a tale of devotion and joy, it was also a tragic story, one of broken hearts, betrayal, and a curse that would taint the water for centuries to come. The legend began long ago with a young woman named Li Mei, a beautiful village girl who was adored by everyone who saw her. Li Mei's beauty was so renowned that even the Emperor of China had heard of it. His fascination with her grew, and he decided he must have her for himself. His emissaries were sent to the village with a decree: Li Mei was to be brought to the palace to become the emperor's concubine. Li Mei, however, loved another. Jin Tao, a humble farmer who had grown up by Crescent Lake, was her one true love. The two had shared their childhood, their dreams, and their hearts, bound by a deep and unshakable bond. They spent countless hours by Crescent Lake, their laughter echoing across the still waters, imagining a future together. But the emperor's command was law, and Li Mei, torn between duty and love, was forced to leave her beloved Jin Tao and go to the palace. Her heart was broken, and though she was surrounded by the opulence of the emperor's palace, she found no joy in it. The grandeur of the palace, the silks and jewels, meant nothing to her. All she could think of was Jin Tao and Crescent Lake. As the days passed, Li Mei's spirit withered. The emperor, obsessed with her beauty, kept her isolated from the world, ensuring she was never able to return to the one place that had truly made her happy. She longed for the simplicity of life by Crescent Lake, where love had been free and pure, but the emperor's palace was a gilded cage. The emperor saw only her beauty, he had no regard for her heart. In the solitude of her chambers, Li Mei's sorrow turned to bitterness. She could not return to Crescent Lake, and so she cursed it. The lake that had once been a symbol of love and life would now become a place of death and darkness. She cursed the water, the land, and all who came near it, vowing that no one would ever find peace by its shores again. The curse she placed upon Crescent Lake took hold swiftly. The once clear waters of the lake turned dark and murky, as if the water itself had been poisoned by her pain. A thick, oppressive fog began to roll in over the lake, and strange whispers rose from the water's depths, whispers of betrayal, sorrow, and loss. The villagers, once drawn to the lake to offer prayers and seek blessings, began to avoid it. The lake had become a place of fear. Travelers who passed near its shores reported hearing faint, mournful cries carried on the wind. It was said that the souls of the cursed lake's victims, those who had drowned or disappeared, were now bound to the water, their spirits unable to find rest. The once beautiful Crescent Lake had become a dark, haunted place. Years passed, and Crescent Lake became little more than a ghost story. Few knew of its tragic past, and fewer still dared to visit the lake. But one day, a group of university students, led by Professor Li Cheng, a historian and archaeologist with an interest in ancient Chinese folklore, set out to uncover the mysteries of the lake. They had heard whispers of Crescent Lake's curse and were eager to investigate. The truth, they thought, would surely be more interesting than the stories. The group traveled for days across the desert, their journey slow and grueling. When they finally reached Crescent Lake, they were greeted by the same eerie silence that had plagued the land for centuries. The lake lay in front of them, its water black and still, the fog clinging to the surface like a living thing. The air was thick, and the temperature dropped unnaturally cold as they set up camp near the water's edge. There was a sense of dread that hung in the air, but Professor Li Cheng, driven by his desire to uncover the truth, dismissed it as superstition. As night fell, the team gathered around the fire, discussing their plans for the next day. But their conversation was interrupted by a faint sound, a soft, melodic lullaby carried on the wind. The melody was eerie, haunting, and seemed to come from all directions. It was a song they did not recognize, but it stirred something deep within them. The wind shifted, and the song grew louder. Liang, one of the students, was the first to stand. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. The others nodded uneasily, but before anyone could respond, Liang began walking toward the water. "I need to find the source," he muttered, his eyes glazed, his body moving almost mechanically. His curiosity seemed to overpower his fear. The others called after him, but Liang, entranced by the song, continued forward, his steps slow and deliberate. His feet sank into the soft sand as he approached the edge of the water. The fog parted in front of him, and through it, a figure appeared, a woman, standing at the edge of the lake, her face obscured by long, dark hair. Her robes fluttered in the wind, but her feet did not touch the ground. She was a vision of sorrow, her body almost translucent, her presence ethereal. The song seemed to emanate from her, her lips moving ever so slightly. Liang stopped in his tracks, mesmerized by the figure. He reached out toward her, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The woman's face turned toward him, her hollow eyes locking onto his. There was no warmth in her gaze, only emptiness, sorrow, and something darker still. She pointed to the water, and Liang's eyes followed her gesture. Beneath the surface of the lake, the shadows seemed to shift, coiling and writhing, like the forms of lost souls, their faces distorted in agony. The others shouted for Liang to come back, but it was too late. The woman's figure glided toward him, and before anyone could react, Liang was pulled into the water. His screams echoed in the night, but the sound was quickly drowned by the churning waves. The woman's mournful lullaby filled the air, and the lake was still once again. The team rushed to the water's edge, but there was no sign of Liang, no trace of him, as if he had been swallowed whole by the lake. The others were paralyzed by fear, too terrified to move or speak. "Liang is gone," Mei Lin whispered, her face pale with shock. Professor Li Cheng, however, knew that this was not just an accident. "It's her," he murmured, his voice trembling. "The curse of Crescent Lake is real. Li Mei's spirit, she's the one who takes the souls." That night, as the fire flickered and cast long shadows across the camp, the team huddled together in silence. Professor Li Cheng could not shake the feeling that the lake was alive, watching them, waiting for the next to fall prey to its curse. The next morning, the team gathered what little courage they had left. They had to leave, but Professor Li Cheng had uncovered something in his research, something that might allow them to break the curse. According to ancient texts, there was a ritual, one that could appease the spirit of Li Mei and lift the curse from Crescent Lake. But the ritual required a sacrifice, a life given freely in exchange for peace. Professor Li Cheng knew what he had to do. He stood before the lake, the ritual etched in his mind, and began to speak the ancient words. The wind began to pick up, and the temperature dropped. The water started to churn, and the shadows beneath the surface seemed to writhe with a life of their own. As he completed the ritual, the ghostly figure of Li Mei appeared before him. She was no longer the sorrowful woman of his dreams, her face was twisted in rage, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. She reached toward him, her voice cold and hollow. "Why do you disturb me?" she hissed. "Why do you seek to undo my curse?" Professor Li Cheng stood firm. "I offer myself as the sacrifice," he said, his voice steady despite the terror coursing through him. "I will free you from your torment. Your suffering ends tonight." Li Mei's face softened, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of sorrow and relief. With a final cry, she reached out, and in that moment, the lake's power surged. The water rose around Professor Li Cheng, but instead of drowning him, it took him into its depths, his soul given to the lake to free Li Mei's spirit. The waters calmed, and the haunting melody faded. The lake was at peace. Li Mei's spirit, freed from her centuries-long torment, vanished, leaving Crescent Lake still and quiet. When the villagers returned to Crescent Lake after the team's disappearance, they found the lake calm once again. The curse had been lifted, but the memory of the lake's dark history remained. Crescent Lake, once a place of beauty and peace, had been forever marked by the tragedy of Li Mei and Jean Tao's love, and the spirits who had been claimed by the lake. But with Li Mei's spirit freed, the lake's dark power was no longer a threat. Yet, as the wind whispered across the desert, it carried with it the faintest lullaby, a haunting reminder of the love and loss that had bound Crescent Lake to the earth. The Louisiana was an old schooner, well known in the bustling port of Chicago for its reliability and skilled crew. On a crisp autumn morning in 1887, the ship set sail on what should have been a routine journey across Lake Michigan. The captain, Arthur Thorne, was a man of seasoned experience, with years of sailing under his belt. His crew, a group of trusted men, prepared the ship for the journey ahead, but none could have known that this voyage would be their last. The weather was calm at first, with the sun shining brightly over the waters. The crew worked diligently, but as the ship left the harbor and entered the open lake, something felt off. The wind began to pick up unexpectedly, and the sky darkened as a thick fog rolled in from the north. The once serene water turned into an eerie silence, the kind that only appeared in the dead of night. Captain Thorne knew better than to ignore the signs. He ordered the crew to prepare for rough conditions, for a thick fog like this was a harbinger of bad weather on the lake. The ship, now enveloped in a near impenetrable mist, continued its journey, moving slowly through the dense fog. The only sounds that filled the air were the creaking of the ship's timbers and the soft, rhythmic lapping of the water against the hull. By nightfall, the fog had thickened, nearly blinding the crew to any landmarks. Visibility was reduced to mere inches. The ship's lanterns glowed dimly in the haze, their light struggling against the swirling, ghostly mist that seemed to move of its own accord. The sailors huddled below deck, speaking in hushed voices, but Captain Thorne remained at the helm, his eyes narrowing in concentration as he steered the ship through the fog. Something about that night felt wrong, as if they were being watched. But Thorne dismissed his unease. After all, the lake was unpredictable, and storms often came without warning. What he didn't know was that this night would be different. This night, the Louisiana would disappear. Hours passed with the crew anxiously awaiting the end of the fog. It wasn't long before strange things began to happen. A glow appeared through the mist, soft and flickering, like the light of a lantern. It wasn't like any light the crew had ever seen before. It didn't seem to belong to any known ship. The glow moved erratically, sometimes appearing close, then retreating into the distance. Then, a figure emerged from the fog, a tall, imposing shape standing at the bow of the ship, dressed in a captain's coat. His face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his presence sent a chill down the spines of the men. The figure raised a lantern high, and its light illuminated the thick fog, casting a sickly, blue glow across the water. Thomas, one of the young sailors, gasped in terror as he realized the man was not a part of their crew. His eyes, glowing eerily in the dim light, met Thomas's, and for a moment, it felt as though the very soul of the young sailor was being pulled into the depths of the lake. "Captain!" Thomas shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the wind that had suddenly picked up. The figure on the bow remained unmoving, as if locked in a trance, staring out into the fog. Captain Thorne's voice came through the cacophony of the storm. "Steady, men! Keep your posts." But even his commanding voice faltered as the figure's form seemed to blur, its outline shifting as though made of mist itself. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. The sound of timbers splintering echoed across the deck, and the Louisiana groaned as if it were alive, fighting against some invisible force. The crew scrambled, trying to regain control, but the ship was already sinking. The water that had been calm mere hours ago turned violent, and the Louisiana tilted dangerously. The crew's frantic cries were drowned out by the roaring of the storm. The ship began to break apart from within, as if it were being torn to pieces by unseen hands. Thorne's last command was to abandon ship, but before any of the men could act, the ship disappeared beneath the surface of Lake Michigan. The fog swallowed the remnants of the Louisiana as if the lake itself had claimed the ship and its crew, leaving no trace behind. No wreckage, no bodies, nothing but a void in the water where the ship had once sailed. For years, the disappearance of the Louisiana puzzled investigators. No one could understand why the ship had vanished, why there were no signs of a wreck. It was as though it had been erased from existence. The legend of the ghost ship began to take root in the small fishing communities along the shores of Lake Michigan. Locals whispered about strange occurrences. Unexplained lights in the fog, eerie sounds of a ship's horn carried on the wind, and ghostly figures seen drifting across the water. One such fisherman, Joe Harris, an old man who had fished the lake for decades, was among the first to report a sighting. One foggy evening, as he sailed out into the lake alone, he saw the glow. It was unmistakable, the flickering lanterns of the Louisiana, just as he had heard about in the tales. The ship was moving silently through the fog, its sails full despite the absence of wind. Its hull was weathered and battered, but there was something otherworldly about it. Harris's heart raced, and for a moment, he thought he was dreaming. But then he saw the captain, standing on the deck, his form tall and skeletal, wearing a tattered coat. The captain raised his lantern high into the air, casting an unnatural glow over the water. Harris's breath caught in his throat as the ship drew closer. The captain's glowing eyes locked onto his. There was no mistaking the figure. It was Captain Thorne. Harris tried to call out, but his voice failed him. He reached for the oars, but they were frozen in place, as though the lake had gripped his boat in a vice. The ghost ship glided silently past him, moving through the fog as if it were part of it. The captain didn't move, his eyes never leaving Harris's gaze as the ship disappeared into the mist, just as quickly as it had appeared. Harris didn't return to the lake after that night. The haunting vision of the ghost ship would stay with him forever. And soon, others came forward with similar tales, sailors, fishermen, even travelers who had crossed the lake at night. All of them spoke of seeing the Louisiana, its lanterns glowing in the distance, the eerie figure of Captain Thorne standing at the helm, watching over them. Some claimed they heard the mournful sound of the ship's horn, echoing through the fog, while others saw the ship slowly disappear, swallowed once again by the mist. Years turned into decades, and the Louisiana's legend only grew. Some believed it was merely a story to keep people away from the dangerous waters of the lake, while others knew the truth, there was something more to the tale. The Louisiana was cursed, trapped in an eternal voyage, never to reach its destination. It wasn't until the 1930s that the wreckage of the Louisiana was discovered, buried beneath the depths of Lake Michigan. A team of divers exploring the lake's submerged ruins stumbled upon the wreckage, but what they found beneath the ship's deck would send shivers down anyone's spine. In the captain's quarters, hidden in a damp, forgotten corner, they discovered an old journal, its pages brittle with age. It was Captain Thorne's journal. The final entry was haunting. "We are doomed. The ship is cursed, and the lake will never let us leave. I have seen it, through the fog. The creature beneath the waves, the one that drags ships into its depths. It waits for us all, and now it is coming for us. There is no escape." The last line was smeared with ink, as though Captain Thorne had written it in a desperate panic, just before the ship was swallowed by the lake's grasp. The divers quickly left the wreck, their hearts heavy with the weight of the discovery. They knew the Louisiana's crew wasn't just lost, they were trapped, bound to the ship for eternity, cursed to sail the foggy waters of Lake Michigan, forever. To this day, on certain nights when the fog rolls in thick and the moon is full, the Louisiana can still be seen, its ghostly lanterns flickering in the distance, its mournful horn echoing across the lake. The ghost ship sails on, its crew locked in a never-ending voyage, never to find rest, never to reach shore. And somewhere, deep beneath the water, the Louisiana waits, its crew's souls bound to the cursed ship, forever lost to the lake's dark embrace. The River Thames, winding through the heart of London, has long been a silent witness to the city's rise and fall. Its waters, dark and murky, reflect the many centuries of history, some celebrated, others forgotten. From the earliest days of Roman London to the bustling trade of the Middle Ages, the river has been both a lifeblood and a grave. But what lies beneath its surface is a different story, a tale of tragedy, sorrow, and lost souls, doomed to forever haunt the murky depths. William Calloway, a journalist with a keen interest in the paranormal, had spent months researching the chilling legends that surrounded the River Thames. His fascination with these dark tales led him to embark on a journey of his own, one that would change his life forever. On a crisp autumn night, armed with nothing but his notebook and a flashlight, William made his way to the banks of the Thames. The fog rolled in thick, cloaking the river and city in an eerie silence. No boats in sight. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of decay. William's heart raced as he stood at the water's edge, staring into the inky blackness of the river. Something felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He had heard the stories, ghostly apparitions, eerie lights, and the cries of a woman calling out for help from the water's depths. Legend spoke of the spirits of those who had drowned in the Thames, lost souls bound to the river, never able to find peace. At first, William had dismissed these as mere superstition. But tonight, as he stood alone on the riverbank, something felt different. Something was drawing him into the depths. The river was eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft lapping of the water against the stone embankment. William walked along the edge, his flashlight flickering erratically as he ventured deeper into the fog. His breath came in shallow gasps, his pulse quickening with each step. The further he went, the more the mist seemed to swallow the light, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides. Then, in the distance, he heard it, a faint whisper, almost like a voice carried on the wind. "Help me." William froze, his heart pounding. He scanned the darkness, searching for the source of the voice. The sound came again, louder, more desperate. "Help me." It was a woman's voice, full of sorrow and anguish. William's stomach twisted. His breath caught in his throat as he called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" There was no reply, just the echo of his own voice swallowed by the thick fog. Then, out of the mist, a figure emerged. A woman, her clothes soaked and her long, dark hair matted to her face. She appeared to be standing just inches from William. Her pale eyes were hollow, her expression vacant, but there was a deep sadness in them. Her presence sent a chill running down his spine. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice barely audible, like the sound of a dying breath. William took a step back, his legs heavy as if rooted to the spot. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman's lips parted, but she didn't respond. Instead, she pointed toward the water. William's eyes followed her finger, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Beneath the murky surface of the Thames, a shadow shifted slowly, just out of reach, but unmistakably there. A figure, pale, bloated, and eerily lifelike, moved beneath the water, just waiting. "What is that?" William whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman's vacant eyes locked with his. "This is where I died," she said softly. "This is where they threw me." The word sent a ripple of terror through William's chest. Slowly, he turned to face the river. He had heard the stories. The tragic tale of Mary, a woman who had been drowned in the Thames by a lover, her body thrown into the river to be lost forever. The story had been whispered in the streets for years, and now, it seemed that Mary's spirit had found him. Who threw you?" William asked, his voice shaking as he stepped closer to the water. The woman's eyes darkened, a flicker of anger crossing her face for the first time. Her body swayed slightly, as if she were caught between this world and the next. She looked away from him, her finger pointing again at the water. "They took my life," she said, her voice low and filled with bitter hatred. "They left me here to drown. The river took me. And now, it takes others." William felt his heart skip a beat as the water churned beneath the surface. A shape began to form, slowly rising, and for a moment, it seemed as though the river itself was alive, moving with purpose, as if it was waiting. The woman's voice grew darker. "The river claims so many," she whispered. "So many souls lost to its depths. They are all trapped here, bound to the river, never to escape." William's mind raced as he realized the true nature of her curse. The Thames was more than just a river, it was a grave, a dark, unforgiving place where the dead wandered, lost and forgotten. And now, it seemed the river had found him too. As he looked back at the woman, his legs trembling, the shadows beneath the water moved again, shifting closer. He took another step back, but the mist closed in around him. His heart pounded in his chest. The woman's figure seemed to grow more translucent, her presence less solid, as though she were becoming one with the fog. The water surged, and a loud, deep groan echoed from the depths of the river. The mist thickened, and the fog seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The temperature dropped, and William's breath came in ragged gasps. He turned to run, but his feet felt as though they were sinking into the ground, as if the earth itself was pulling him back. "No," he shouted, but the mist swallowed his voice. The river roared as if in anger, the water churning violently, pulling at his legs. The figure of the woman seemed to fade into the mist, her voice echoing in the distance, "The river's curse will claim you too." William stumbled, falling to his knees as the fog pressed in around him. The voices of the dead, the lost souls of the river, filled the air. Whispers surrounded him, begging for release, crying for justice. He felt the river calling to him, its dark, cold embrace threatening to pull him under. But just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog lifted. The mist cleared, and the oppressive weight that had settled around him vanished. William was alone once more, standing on the riverbank, gasping for air. The Thames was calm again, its surface smooth and undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. His body shook as he looked around, trying to make sense of what he had just experienced. There was no sign of the woman. No shadow in the water. Just the empty river, stretching out before him. But deep down, he knew that what he had witnessed was real. The curse of the Thames was not just a legend. It was alive, and it was waiting. William stumbled away from the water's edge, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the river's secrets would never be fully revealed. It had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others before him. And as he turned to leave, he felt the cold hand of the river on his shoulder. Looking back one last time, he saw the faint outline of a figure standing at the water's edge, a woman, her face pale, her eyes empty. The river Thames had claimed yet another soul.